Cool. Okay, a lot of you might be thinking another DIY session, or in this case, but because at the end of the day, I think one of the big questions that I ask myself is why are we building these functionalities for customers? What would be the real, you could say, benefit or value that they will deliver? So just in that context, I just wanted to take a slight step back and just look at what's happening in the market, why the market. Now, if you look at Gartner, what they're predicting, so they're predicting that almost, you see, 3/4 of all applications that will be developed going forward will be a low-code, no-code technology. And what's driving that is automation pressures and IT staff, you could say, shortages. Now, if today you wanted to introduce a new capability which requires coding and other types of capability, then you have to run after IT. And sometimes they are so full that they have other priorities that especially finance and AP requirements go down the list. It's only when something drastic happens, there's an audit failure that happens, an audit or a compliance that has failed, does it jump up on that. So what's happening is that a lot of companies have realized that there's a need to disconnect from IT and give the subject matter experts, which is finance and AP people, the ability to do this task themselves. And that's what's giving rise to this concept of citizen developer. Because you see these no-code, low-code approach, and DIY is one of those that we are introducing in our technology, allows you to do exactly that. It allows you to be able to develop those apps or capabilities or compliance rules or business rules without having to know any type of coding. The system is creating the code at the back end. The next evolution of it is what ChatGPT and Claude from Anthropic does. You just give it a prompt and it just writes the code. Write me a calculator. And it just writes the code, builds it, runs it, and it's working as you expect. So that is the next evolution. We are not there yet with DIY, but that is the direction we want to head. So we want to go to the first stage of giving you the ability to do it manually, or the system generates these pre-created ones. And then going forward, we want a prompt where you tell it, I want a compliance rule that checks for supplier entity. And then if the VAT registration ID was not provided or TIN number is missing, I want to trigger an automation. So that's what we want to achieve. So this is the first step in that. So the low-code, no-code approach, as you might have seen from the screens, is basically a graphical user interface that allows you to build these applications by, you could say, by clicking on it and then selecting items, embedded functionalities, et cetera. And then be able to create your code, and then that is it. Basically, deploy it yourselves. So now the power is in your hands. Now, I will caution that, yes, there are complexities which would still require IT, so we are not saying IT is going to go away or AppZen is going to go away. Because if you come to us with a requirement, we are doing all the work, spending a week to build that app and then deploying it. So there will always be situations where that level of complexity doesn't allow us to give you the ability to do that, so we'll have to step in. But what it does do is for some simple compliance rules, you should be able to automatically do this, deploy it, test it on your own, and then just get it up and running with it in that case. So that is what you could say the underlying reason for DIY Mastermind was, because we had this Mastermind platform for a while. But we didn't expose it to our customers. Anything that you needed to do, you had to come to us. And then we build an app, we deploy it on our app store, and then it gets activated. So now we thought, how can we enable and give you those capabilities from Mastermind so that you can do all of this stuff yourself? And the culmination of that is what you saw from Kunal, from Martin, et cetera, is this no-code, low-code approach of being able to create your own business rules, being able to trigger your own automations, and being able to do that very, very quickly. And we have introduced it in different areas. So I'm going to touch on this from an accounts payable perspective, because that's my area of expertise, and hopefully you will see the benefit of that. Now, on the AP side specifically, we have got these 3 rule sets, as I call them, or automations, that we have introduced. One is what we call the standard rule set. So this is where you will have a pre-created rules. So let's say specifically for purchase order invoicing. So for purchase order invoicing, all the different checks that you do on a purchase order invoice, which could be there's no PO, is the PO missing, price discrepancy, quantity discrepancy, PO out of funds, and so on and so forth. So all of these are pre-created. All you need to do is toggle it on for the different entities and suppliers you want them to trigger. And those could be your purchase order related suppliers. And then the only thing that you're then setting up is exception resolution, because that's where the pain is. I mean, matching any system can do. They're rule-based systems. We do it using AI. That's the difference. We do it more efficiently. But when something fails, the problem happens for AP is, how do you resolve that exception? Because depending on the type of invoice, the type of PO, there is a different workflow that needs to be triggered. Could be even supplier. So the complexity around figuring out who to send that invoice for exception resolution is the big challenge from an AP perspective. That is the manual piece. So we want to automate that portion, the exception resolution workflow piece, that when an exception for PO invoice triggers, we want the system to make the decision who to send it to. And there could be multiple scenarios. So for just one exception, unit price discrepancy, for example, and I'll have a use case. If it's a direct PO, meaning it's a direct spend related PO that it has triggered, it needs to go to someone in the factory, okay, if there's a price discrepancy. If it's an indirect spend related PO, it needs to go to the PO requester or the PO owner. If it is services, it needs to go to AP, and then they need to, or it should go to facilities. So the ability to analyze what type of invoice it is or PO it is, and then to trigger the right workflow is where you will see the benefit. And I'll show that in the system live. Oops, I jumped. Now, the custom rule set is where you want to define a completely, you could say, new exception. So let's say you need compliance checks that you need to create that do different things in different countries, in different entities. Then this is where you can define the whole logic for that check using the custom rule set. So that's the second one in that list, and I'll show examples. And the last is workflow automations. I think our teams showed that a little bit, but we actually, so today if you were using our AP product, you would be restricted to creating workflows that used a couple of elements. It could be either supplier-driven workflow, it could be either entity-related workflow, or it could be like cost object, like cost center, GL account code-driven. So what we thought was that is too small of a number of variables to allow you to do complex workflows, because that restricts you a lot. So what we did was we said we open up the workflow capability where we give you the ability to define on any element, on the header, line, PO, supplier, entity. So now you can combine any element on the invoice to drive the workflow. A good example is you want to drive approval workflows based on supplier and entity, and then there might be other elements, the type of invoice. So if it's a credit note, a particular workflow trigger, so the system looks at the invoice type. If it's an invoice related, if it's a performer related invoice, you want to trigger a different type of workflow. So to be able to use any element on the invoice to drive a workflow is really powerful. So that's what the workflow automations will allow you to do. That combine any element on that invoice and define your workflow accordingly. So it just removes the need for, and it includes custom fields. You might have custom data that you're extracting, like flags and other stuff on an invoice. You can even include that in your workflow now with this capability. So I think I've quickly touched on this. So this is the standard exception rule set that I just mentioned. And this one is obviously the custom exceptions where you can build exceptions. I'll show this live in the system, but I think I've already gone through that in a bit of a detail. And the last thing is the approval, is the workflows. So this is the Mastermind DIY automations, which helps you build the different recipes. Okay, so let's jump into it. And what I want to do is, first of all, take a scenario. Sorry, just one more slide before we go. Yeah, so let's take this scenario. So you are a US-based manufacturing organization, and let's say you are doing PO matching. So you are purchase order heavy on your side, and a unit price discrepancy, when that happens, what you want to do is you want to automate the exceptions workflow piece. And you want to drive the workflow based on the type of purchase order, but you could have other elements as well, so I just kept it simple. And then if it's direct spend related PO, it should go to the factory person, so someone specific, in this case, Mark Smith. If it's indirect spend related PO, it should go to the PO requester. They need to resolve that exception. And if it's, let's say, a facilities related invoice, then it should go to that facilities person, and they actually resolve it. So that is the use case that we want to look at in this case. And I think if you look at AP, they will be spending lots of time and effort on trying to send invoices to the right people and then tracking them, chasing them, escalating things. And this is what causes, you see, bad supplier relationships. The supplier doesn't get paid, people are on holiday, you don't know where the invoice went, whether they have approved it or not, or they have resolved the exception or not. So that's where what we're trying to address with this is give you that visibility, first of all, and have automations where the system makes the decision who needs to be resolving this exception. So, okay, so let's jump in, and let me just show this a little bit live so that you can see how it works. Okay, so I'm just going to log into the AppZen's system. Sign on. I'm just going to quickly emulate my company, which is Taylor & Co. and Imran, and then I'm logged in. Cool, and I'm going to go into the autonomous AP product here. Okay, so I'm now logged into the autonomous AP solution. So this is going to be the Invoice Workbench, where I'll have visibility of all of the different invoices that are being processed within the system and in different stages. So the first thing, the way we access the Mastermind DIY for AP is you go into the settings side here on the left, and then within exception settings is where you will see how you can go about configuring this. So there are a couple of things here very quickly. The scope. The scope is where you can break up your business rules, compliance rules by entity, by supplier. So you can group them, entities and suppliers, and then have specific rules enabled just for them. Or you can keep everything in one place. So it could be a global, you could say, scope. It's just a group. It's like a group that you can define. In the middle section is where you will see the different rules. So I'm going to click on the Turing Co. US entity here. If I just scroll down, so first of all, in the middle section, you see the ones which what we call the standard business rules that are already there. So here you can see these are different PO-related business rules. So PO closed, PO line closed. And you can see you can toggle between on and off. So you can say, activate this for this entity and supplier, and the system will automatically activate it. And then the system is going to do this analysis automatically on those purchase order invoices. So in some cases, you might activate all of them. In other cases, you might activate only 2, 3 of them, which are relevant. But those are the checks you're running on those invoices. Now, I'm going to take the one which is the price discrepancy one. So this is a line unit price mismatch. So what I want the system to do is that if unit price mismatch happens, it needs to take actions. That use case, apologies. Turn this off. That's a rookie mistake. Okay, so in this particular case, what I want to do, so if you remember that use case, I want to create a separate, you could say, automation per use case in this case, depending on the type of purchase order. So on the right-hand side, what you will see is that I've activated the unit price mismatch, and what the system is saying that if this exception is triggered, then how do you want, what automation do you want to trigger? So in this case, I'm going to add a variable that says, so here you can see if I click the add button, this will give me access to all of the fields on the invoice header. 11. That's it. So you can see that you have access to all of the fields at invoice header, line level, entity, you have suppliers, you have purchase order. So literally you have access to all of the fields to basically include in your logic. So in this particular case, I want to very quickly search for type, and then I want to go to the purchase order, and there I'm going to select purchase order header and the type. So in this case, I'm going to say, I want the system, whenever this exception is triggering, I want the system to look at the type of purchase order, and then you have the option to define different operators. And then I'm going to say something. So I'm going to say, if it is direct, let's say type of spend on that PO type, or the PO type is of direct spend, then what I want the system to do is I want it to workflow this to a particular person within the factory. So in this case, I can define Mark. Hoping it was going to pick it up. So let's take Graham as the person. So now I've defined it, and then I can also set what can that user do. So what capabilities from an action perspective do you want to give them? Do you want them to the ability to reject that invoice? Do you want to have them the ability to reassign it to someone else once they get that exception? Should this be fixed in the ERP system, as well as override that exception? So they have the ability to override it. So if that unit price discrepancy is you're happy to accept that, they have the ability to say, yeah, I'm going to happy to accept that. So you define this, and then you save your changes. So what this will do is now allow the system to automatically evaluate the invoice, and if the unit price discrepancy is triggered and the PO type is direct, it's going to send it to Graham for exception resolution. Now, what I want to do is, for the second scenario, I want to add another automation. And again, this one also looks at type. And then in this case, it's indirect. And then in this particular scenario, then, I want this to go to the PO requester. So whatever the purchase order owner is on the purchase order, the system knows who that PO owner is, so it will automatically route that invoice to them for exception resolution. So now I've created another automation, number 2, and I can then turn this on, and so forth. So now the system, when this exception triggers, is evaluating those elements and then triggering whichever automation is relevant in that case. So now you can see that AP doesn't need to know all of this stuff. They need to take no action. The system will automatically take that action for you and send these invoices out. Now, again, a lot of companies, they might look at this this way of doing rules, and they say, well, it's like if-else statements or and/or statements. So where is the AI element in here? So that's the big question. So that's where, hopefully very soon, we're going to introduce what we call AI functions. Now, in the logic, you will not only create the logic, you'll also be able to deploy AI capabilities in it. So let me give you an example. If, for example, you receive an invoice, you need to obviously evaluate the data, but then you also want to use AI, like an AI function called keyword AI function that reads the description, figures out if gift is a keyword in that description, and then takes an action. So now that's where Gen AI comes into play, where the system is looking at the description on the line items of that invoice. It's looking for particular keywords that you have told it, and then you trigger an automation if it says gifts. Because it might be that that might be a compliance thing, that there are some gifts being at. I mean, I've chosen gifts. It could be something very legal specific, which triggers an automation that basically sends that invoice to the legal team or compliance team. So the ability to evaluate the data and understand what's in that data and then triggering automations is the key thing. And that's where we differentiate from others. Because looking at it from here, it's more looks like and or statements that you're writing. But with the AI functions embedded in that logic will add another level of, let's say, automation and capability. Cool, so let's take a look at another example. So let's say duplicate invoices. So in this case, I'm going to activate the duplicate invoice check. And in this case, when the system receives a duplicate or detects a duplicate, what I also want to do is I want to straight away basically reject this invoice. So I don't want AP to look at, so if you have high confidence around the AppZen's duplicate process, today you see the system presents the invoice and you have to review why it's flagged as a duplicate. But if you say, I'm happy with how the system is doing this, I want to reject it, and then an email should go out to the supplier telling them the invoice was rejected. So the communications framework will allow us to send those emails to suppliers and communicate that their invoice was rejected, but this is the reason, these are the invoices we have in the system. So again, a level of automation where AP does not need to touch that invoice. The system should perform all of these checks for you. So that's hopefully also sort of giving an idea of the value proposition of the DIY Mastermind platform and being able to do this yourselves. All right, so I'm just going to jump straight to my next scenario. I think I'm not going to go to the slides for this, but I'm just going to talk about custom. So here, I'm now in my Turing UK Limited and Germany GmbH entities, and there are particular suppliers that I need to run these checks. So this is where you see the custom rule sets. So this is rule sets that you can build from scratch. In this case, you're not only defining the logic, but you're also then defining the automations. In the standard ones, the logic is predefined. At the back, you're just activating that logic, and you're just building the automation. So here, you can literally define the logic for this check. So this is, again, taking that low-code, no-code approach where you select your different elements. So what is this particular rule doing? So in this case, it's checking for a German supplier invoice that is being invoiced to a German entity. And it's checking whether if they are charging us VAT, we need to make sure that the VAT registration ID was provided on that invoice. So that's a requirement in Germany. So the logic here is pretty much straightforward. So you say, is VAT registration number, does that exist on that invoice? Is the VAT amount not zero, meaning that they are actually charging you VAT on that invoice? Is it for a German entity, that invoice? And then is it a German supplier? So you would define your logic, and then once that's defined, you can set the automations below here to say that if this is triggered, it should go to the AP team, and then they decide what to do with it. So you can, invoice assignee is basically that the person that invoice is receiving that invoice, should it get assigned to them, or that AP person. So in this case, obviously the system will very quickly determine this and then send it to that particular person. Cool, so let's look at how the invoices will look in this case from a user perspective. So I know we have looked at the configuration, but if I go into the invoice workbench, and when invoices start coming in, so let's go to this first invoice, which is the NCR local one. So this is the invoice that is triggering that PO match exception for unit price discrepancy. So here what will happen is as soon as an invoice comes in, and it's a purchase order invoice, so here you can see that there's a purchase order number, and the system matches it to the PO. It's going to then tell me that, look, there is an exception that was triggered, and it's a unit price mismatch. And what I've done is I've sent it off to this user called Mark Smith that was configured. So it's automatically done that. So AP will not have to assign this invoice. But from a visibility perspective, you'll have full control. It doesn't mean that if the system is automating things, you lose control. You will still be able to do that. And similarly, if I show an example here for the second one, which is the German invoice example, where so in this case, you can see that the system will then immediately trigger an error and say that the VAT is being charged by the supplier, but no VAT ID was detected. So the system will block that invoice in this case and let AP then decide whether they want to reject it or check it with the supplier in this case. Make sense? Last thing I do want to show very quickly is the view from a manager perspective. So if you were to go and log in as Mark Smith, so we completely revamped this quarter the business user UI so that it's a lot more clearer and easier for them to understand what's happening. And we also merged, you see, the different approvals and exceptions, everything into one screen. So here, if I'm logging in as Mark Smith, I will be able to, first of all, have visibility of all of the invoices that have exceptions coming into my queue, also invoices that need approvals. And then once you have expense audit activated, they will have all of the visibility of all of the different expense claim that need their approvals or that have exceptions or other things as well in the same interface. So this way you will have one UI or one queue for them to be able to focus and be able to complete all of these tasks. I'm just going to focus on exceptions instead of approvals. So here, if I expand on the NCR, you remember this was the purchase order one. So if I expand on that, actually I think I wanted to go into, just go out, it's a bit slow today. So if I were to just click on this quickly, it should, straight within that same queue, it's going to show me what exception is triggering. It's going to also show you the PO line, the invoice line, which has the price discrepancy. And this is where you will be able to very quickly make a decision because you don't actually need to go into the detailed stage. And based on what activities or actions we have allowed them to, they can override this, they can reject it, or they can reassign it to something else. So within that same dashboard screen, you will be able to see all of the exceptions. The system focuses your eye on what has changed. So in this case, you can see that the purchase order unit price was $700. The invoice came in for $760. So the system has, and that might be outside of your tolerance, and therefore the system is now highlighting it to AP and to the business user for them to action. Any questions? Sorry, I'm just conscious that I've been talking. Any questions that come to mind around this, please. Awesome. Overall amount, exactly. So the system tracks, obviously, out of funds exceptions can be triggered. You see, you might have multiple invoices matching to the same PO. Maybe say you have different batches of goods coming in. So you might have quantities being invoiced with multiple invoices coming in on the PO side. So the system is tracking all of that. And then wherever it sees a discrepancy, either it's gone over the total purchase order amount or it's matching specifically to the unit price, whatever you have activated in the system, it's going to evaluate it accordingly. Okay. Sure. So discounts is an interesting thing because sometimes that results in mismatches, I guess, during matching. So today we had customers that approached us, so we are still working on that, our solution around that. So the thing that we started doing is, can we identify the discounts on invoices? Because they can be presented either within the line, they could be separate at the header level that there's 20% discount on this invoice. So the first challenge we said, can we identify and extract that? And then once we have done that, then how do we take it into account during the matching piece, that there is a discount because you're paying that invoice, or there might be a reason why the supplier is offering that discount, and be able to incorporate that during the matching process. So that is coming, but we're still working on that piece. But we do recognize that that is something, especially if you have suppliers that offer discounts on their invoices. I'm going to finish off very quickly with just one last bit that I want to show before I finish. And for that, I'll just jump to our Mastermind platform. I did want to give you a sneak preview into the approval automations. So if I go, so this is what it would look like from an approval automations perspective. So you can just imagine that you have all of these variables being taken into account to trigger an approval workflow. So here, if you look at this, you will see that as soon as an invoice is submitted for approval, and only if that invoice has this particular entity ID, it's got this segment code or GL account code, cost center, there could be a marketing code because this is a marketing related approval workflow, and then there might be this location as well. And then on top of that, I could add, for example, a type. So in this case, I want the invoice type to be select from here, let's say performer. So now I've added another variable to this. Then this is the workflow I want to trigger, which is basically it goes, if it's greater than, if it's less than 10,000, it should go to Sal. If it's greater than 10,000, it should go to Mark Smith. And then I've got an accountant, Todd Smith, that it always goes to. So now you will have like a 4-eye approval concept if in your company, then yes, if it's below 10,000, Sal will approve it, and then it will go to the accountant always. They will always have to approve it because they're checking all of those elements and approving that invoice. So you can actually now build these approval workflows to very complex, you could say, logic, and that will basically allow you to get the invoice to the right people, get the right approval chains and right approvals done within the system. And that's where the beauty of the Mastermind platform comes in. It gives you that, it empowers you to be able to do all of these tasks yourselves. So hopefully what I've shown you has given you a bit more understanding of what Mastermind DIY is, why we have introduced it, and what benefits and value proposition it brings. If you have any questions, then definitely please come outside. I've got a demo booth, so we'll show you more capabilities. But hopefully you found that useful, and thank you very much.